Chapter 1 presents us with a definition of politics. To note for the student here, to pay attention to the idea of a public sphere versus private sphere. A very important idea in terms of where one's private life ends and where public life begins, and typically we refer to politics as being addressing those issues in the public sphere. Then the chapter tells us about what comparative politics is as a field of study, and what kind of issues that comparative politics is addressing. And then a nice discussion has ensued in a philosophical sense in terms of the state of nature and what government should do and what is the role of government. And then the chapter tells us about why do we need governments and what functions do they perform. For example, governments should provide security and order, protecting individual rights and civil liberties, promoting economic growth, providing public goods such as infrastructure, highways, education, and defense systems, providing social justice, and protecting the weak. Then those are the positive things that governments do, and then the chapter then talks about the negative aspects of government. In other words, when governments go wrong, so to speak. And here we're talking about rent-seeking behavior and the creation of vested interests, for example, here. And overall, the idea, too, that sometimes governments can just become inefficient and kind of a drag on the economic system. Then a political system is defined in the text, and the student should pay particular attention to this idea because the systems analysis is what we're going to be using to compare different political systems across the planet with, and so one should become quite familiar with the idea of how a system operates and the interrelated parts of a system. Then the chapter has a nice discussion on defining what a nation is and what a state is. And then a nice discussion that follows that in terms of things that can bind a nation together or tear it apart. And here we're talking about issues of language and ethnicity and religion. And then finally, the chapter ends with a pretty thorough discussion on the idea of economic development and looking at how some countries are highly economically developed and others are not, and some statistical measures that students of comparative politics should be pretty well aware of when analyzing economic performance of different countries, for example. And then the chapter ends with a discussion on democracy and how there's been globally a spread of democracy, and so the type of governments that most countries of the world now have is a democratic system, although there are still some authoritarian regimes still out there in the world.